They shall beat their swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. Plowshares and pruning hooks are implements used to prepare the ground for planting and to helping things to take root and grow. When I was a youngster, I remember the gardens we planted every spring. We were a big family. Food was scarce, so we had to supplement our food source by having vegetable gardens and various fruit-bearing trees. It was always a fun time for us because we got to help out digging up the earth and planting the seeds. And what child does not love digging in the dirt? But that's the way it was. It was exciting to wake up in the morning, to rush out and see if any of the seeds had sprouted. And when the first seeds did appear, it was a cause for celebration. The hard work of preparing the soil and planting the seeds had paid off. We begin Advent today, and if we are to take God seriously, we have work to do during this time. If we are open to God's presence, we become open to the work which God produces in our lives and to the effect that it can have. As we begin Advent, we also begin a preaching series over the next 4 Sundays called So What? S-O-W, So What? Play on words. And in this, we are putting our hope in God's plan for growth and on how we can participate with God in our own personal growth, the growth of our parish, and the growth of the greater community here in Lower Sackville. But the first stage of getting anything to grow is the planting of the seeds. And this is what our readings for today are meant to do, to plant the seeds of what God wants to do in our lives. They urge us to live in the present, to be alert to what is happening around us, and to grow God's presence in our lives. God wants to plant the seeds of peace, prosperity, and love in our lives, but He wants us to nurture those seeds for growth. But we have to step back even further, because before we can plant the seeds, we have to prepare the soil. And in some cases, that work is done for us by God. But in other cases, we have to get our hands dirty doing the work. Think about it. If you try to garden or plant in poor ground, full of rocks and roots and clay and anything else, your plants aren't going to thrive, much less eventually bear fruit. Metaphorically speaking, when God takes the spears and swords out of our lives and replaces them with plowshares and pruning hooks, He is preparing the ground anew for planting those seeds of peace, prosperity, and love. In some cases, we recognize God's preparing work in retrospect. What brought us depth and character can be things which have caused us grief and shame. And when we look back on the swords and spears that God is taking from our lives, they might be something like getting picked last for the school team, by being bullied on the playground. They might be some physical inadequacy or an addiction we can't master, or some other small and big wounds and bruises that these swords and spears have inflicted on our souls. The memory and experience of these negative or uncomfortable moments can be transformed by God into the plowshares and pruning hooks of a more positive future when we become open to the way in which God is teaching us to walk in His paths. When we become aware of God's presence in our lives, it changes the way we see ourselves and how we relate to the world around us. We may not always be able to change our situation, but we can change the way we react to it and can work our way through it. However, this often means that we must be willing to give up things, to let go of things which are not conducive to the growth God wants us to undergo. Paul himself gives his own list of things not to do in our second readings. Things such as reveling, and drunkenness, debauchery, licentiousness, quarreling, and jealousy. Sounds like me during my first 10 years in the Navy. Wow. For example, we might need to let go of anger or grudges or resentments against someone who has hurt us. We might have to give up our old and comfortable ways of doing things in order to make way for new ones. There may be bad habits or bad uses of our time, our energy, and our resources that are more often a drain on us than a source of growth. Giving these things up is a necessary part of allowing God to prepare the soil of our lives. Once we've allowed God to break ground in our lives, then we want to receive the seeds He is planting. But seeds just lie in the ground and wait to be nurtured and cared for until they sprout. And when we nurture and care for the seeds God planted, they help us to become patient, to turn to God, and to change our attitudes, our values, and our actions. An awareness of God's presence in our lives enables us to live in a way that is much different from the world around us. Father Ron Rolheiser calls this awareness of God's presence a sensitivity to the deeper contours of life within. Sometimes we call it depth of spirit, or wisdom, or good character. But whatever we call it, it is a certain grasp of those things which hold life together at its roots, and which must be respected so that life doesn't wilt, or get choked out, or turn against us. It grasps the things we have to do, and not just the things that we like to do. By nurturing our seeds in God's way, we can gain wisdom that helps us to pay attention and to make good use of the gifts and resources that He gives us for His glory and for the benefit of helping and blessing others as well. By nurturing our seeds in this way, God gives us His glory, and we want to use the present time we have here on earth, not spent in idleness or on wasted living, but in doing God's work. And He does have work for us to do. Thankfully, the work is often things that we enjoy, loving, honoring, and serving God, and loving, honoring, and servicing our families, our neighbors, and our communities. So Advent is a time to start planting. Who would have thought the coming of winter as prime gardening weather? Not I. But this time, over the next 4 weeks, we should focus on our spiritual preparation, on planting seeds of faith in our lives. We should look inward at our attitudes, our thoughts, and our actions, and discern what unprepared soil stands in the way of growing the seeds which Jesus is preparing to plant in our lives. Much like the excitement from the waiting I had as a youngster, looking forward to those first sprouts in the garden, Advent is also a time of joyful expectation and patient waiting. Early in the season, we receive what God wishes to do so that we can wait expectantly, if not always patiently. For the revelation of the Incarnation, the Son of God, Word made flesh, who is coming to dwell among us. We can look forward to the growth and the fruits yet to come, and this allows our Advent to be hopeful about our own growth, and to acknowledge where we are now, and to where we need to go, to be humble enough to accept God's help as He readies the soil. In the weeks ahead, Father Tim and Father Michael will share more about the growing stages, from the seeding to the sprouting to the blooming, and finally to the fruit-bearing and fruit-saving bearing results. But for now, for today, we are just looking at the beginning of this growth and the need to nurture that which God has planted. This Advent, let's do ourselves a big favor. Let's take a little time each day to pause and focus on the Lord, to reflect on how we are feeling, on what may be the swords and spears in our lives, and discern how we are progressing with our planting and on what we need to do to make ourselves prepared for the coming of the Son of Man. Then and only then will we be ready to embrace the theme of our series, So What? And be ready to do what the prophet Isaiah is telling us in the first reading today. Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths.